Greetings, sisters, and welcome to Wonder Woman, Warrior for Peace. My name is Angela, and this is Episode 9. Okay, we're starting off in the Golden Age as usual with Sensation Comics Volume 1, Issue 8. Cover date is August 1942. Writer is Charles Moulton, who we know is actually William Moulton Marsden, and the artist was Harry G. Peter. And I'm reading this from Wonder Woman Archives Volume 1. Secretary Diana Prince asks her coworker Beth why she was 2 hours late, and Beth tells her she saved her friend Helen, who was recently released from a reformatory, from killing herself. Beth proceeds to tell Helen's story. Helen and her friend Molly worked at the Bullfinch department store, but Molly got sick from overwork and malnutrition. Bullfinch only paid their employees $11 a week, so Molly couldn't afford enough food or the vitamins the doctor prescribed. Helen promised to get her friend the pills, but was caught when she tried to steal them from the Bullfinch pharmacy. The judge was willing to be merciful on account of her motives, but the store manager, Mr. Googans, insisted she go to jail. Helen asked Beth to look after Molly, so the shop girl moved in with her and her health started to improve once she got enough to eat. Then yesterday, Helen got out of jail and went to visit Molly at the store. When Mr. Googans saw the two talking, he fired Helen on the spot. Beth came home that night to find Molly fighting to keep Helen from shooting herself. Together the women convinced their friend not to end her life, but she swore she'd get revenge on Bullfinch for ruining them. Diana, shocked, asks Colonel Darnell if there's anything they can do. He tells her it's outside the Army's jurisdiction, but he can grant her a leave of absence during which she can unofficially investigate. When she reaches the Bullfinch store, a group of women are demanding better pay and working conditions from the manager. He fires them all, claiming there are hundreds of girls waiting to take their place. And when Diana barges her way into his office, he says he only takes orders from the personal representative of Gloria Bullfinch. Diana, seeing the shop girls picketing in front of the store, plans on visiting Miss Bullfinch that night, but her plans are changed when Steve invites her out to dinner. She asks to go to the 400 Club, which she knows Miss Bullfinch often visits. There she confronts Gloria and her fiancé, Prince Guigi del Slimo, because the naming convention in 1940s comic books is just one step above Pilgrim's Progress in terms of subtlety. Before taking off in a huff, Guigi claims the store girls stole $500,000 from Gloria, and she says all her business dealings are taken care of by her agent, Mr. Doe, at the Hotel Traffair. After an otherwise lovely evening, as they exit the club, Diana and Steve are confronted by armed men who want to kidnap the secretary. Steve fights back and the men flee, but he follows them in a taxi. He chases them to the Hotel Traffair, but gets knocked unconscious from behind. Diana, driving Steve's car back home, changes into her Wonder Woman costume and pays a visit to Gloria Bullfinch. She lassos the woman and takes her to Holiday College, where she hypnotizes Gloria into thinking she's a poor girl named Ruth Smith. Wonder Woman orders Etta to take Ruth and the other Holiday girls and get jobs at the Bullfinch store, since they recently fired 50 of their shop girls. Etta ends up working at the candy counter, of course, and Ruth realizes how tiring it is to work in the store. Later, Beth talks to Diana, telling her that Helen plans to rob Bullfinch's. Instead of the police, Diana calls Etta as Wonder Woman, and tells her and the girls to stay hidden in the shop that night to watch out for thieves. Realizing that Steve is missing, Wonder Woman rushes to the Hotel Traffair to confront Mr. Doe, but his room is empty save for a masked Helen wielding a gun. She's surprised to see Wonder Woman, who, at the very least, acts like she doesn't recognize her. Honestly, it's kind of hard to tell. I mean, the only disguise is a domino mask, so it's obvious to us that it's Helen, but I guess technically Diana hasn't met her in person, so who knows. But just as she's questioning the girl, Wonder Woman is knocked out from behind by two thugs. They load her into a car and take her to their boss, evidently ignoring the masked woman who is right in front of them. At the department store, Etta and the Holiday girls hide in unplugged refrigerators, though Ruth has collapsed from exhaustion. After dark, they sneak through the store and find the murdered body of the night watchman. They see a figure in the dark, and as they grapple with it, a shot rings out. When the lights come on, the girls confront Helen, who broke into the store to steal dresses as revenge for her mistreatment. However, the harmless shot alerted the police, who investigate and find the women. Meanwhile, Wonder Woman is brought by the thugs into a room with a masked man who, in a foreign accent, tells them they got the wrong girl. She asks Mr. Doe where Steve Trevor is, and he says she knows too much and can no longer live, so he has Googans lock her up in a vault labeled Bullfinch. Inside is a large safe, from which the voice of Steve Trevor is heard, yelling to Wonder Woman that there is a bomb inside. She wrenches the door off its hinges and defuses the bomb at the last second. Wonder Woman then forces the vault door open to find the room outside empty, so she and Steve rush to catch their captors. Googans and Doe try to leave the store, but they are met by the police, who tell them they've caught the burglars. However, Helen points at Doe and says she suspected he was behind the thieving. That's why she took a room next to his at the hotel and was able to hear his plans to steal from the store. She hates Bullfinch so much she didn't have a problem with that, but she can't stay silent after the night guard's murder. Doe slaps her across the cheek, but then Wonder Woman shows up and tells him to do the same to her. All he ends up doing is hurting his hand, so she whacks him across the jaw and removes his mask, revealing Luigi del Slimo. The noise wakes up the unconscious Ruth, whose memory is restored by a gesture from Wonder Woman. Gloria proclaims Del Slimo a traitor, calling off their engagement and smacking him across the face in turn. Several days later, Miss Bullfinch takes over management of the store and hires Helen as her assistant. She tells the women that because Wonder Woman made her understand how difficult their work is, their salaries will be doubled and their working conditions and hours will be improved. And for once, it's actually Diana who gets the credit in the newspapers, though as she tells Steve, she owes it all to Wonder Woman, who was only there for him. So, just like last month, this Golden Age issue was focused more on social issues than supervillains, which is a nice change from your usual biff bam pow superhero story. I did find it odd. I mean, Diana has been hoping for how many months that Steve would notice her and ask her out, and he finally does, and she asks to go to one of the ritziest places in town. I mean, she's a secretary, and he's a major. They aren't exactly high society, but she specifically asks to go to this super fancy restaurant that the millionaire department store owner goes to. I mean, good grief, girl, you asked to go somewhere that fancy for a first date? You're not going to have a second one because he's not going to be able to afford it. And then, in the middle of their dance, she sees Gloria's table and just goes over and confronts her. I mean, I can't help but think of it from Steve's point of view. He asks this girl out, she insists on going to a super fancy restaurant, and then her only reason to be there is to antagonize a millionaire. That's really not the way to make a good impression on a first date. Something to note, the artwork for the Golden Lasso has already changed. It's no longer just a row of dots. It doesn't have the braided, twisted appearance like a normal rope, but it's no longer obviously a chain. I did find it kind of funny that Etta and all the holiday girls were able to get jobs at this store so quickly. They just showed up and said, hey, we want a job, and I mean, judging by the amount of time Steve is missing, they're only really there for a day. Maybe that was just the way it worked back in the 40s. I don't know, but I know I'd love to just show up at a place and say, hey, give me work, and get a job instantly. That would be great. One thing that unfortunately needs to be mentioned, when Wonder Woman is rushing through the hotel, she rushes past a couple of the staff, looks like a bellhop and a cleaning lady, and they are both very dated, cartoony stereotypes of a black man and woman with, giant red lips and dialogue that's got the accent all spelled out. I'd love for this to not be the case and to not have to talk about it, but it's the kind of thing that sadly can't be ignored, because if you just gloss over it, you're never going to learn from it, and I truly believe that if you don't learn from history, you're kind of doomed to repeat it. Of course, the other extreme is to be so offended by this that we go, oh, Marsden and Peters were just horrible people, and we're not going to read anything that they wrote ever again, which would certainly cut down on my prep time for the podcast, but kind of defeats the whole point. So, personally, I think it's best to find a happy medium, and short of buying Miss Cleo a giant ice cream sundae, I think it's best to acknowledge that, yes, this is bad today, this was bad back then, but we can't let it ruin all of Marsden's work. Because, no one 75 years ago was perfect. No one today is perfect. Obviously, with this show, we're focusing on the good stuff they did, but that doesn't mean that we, don't call out the bad stuff when it happens. Get it? Miss Cleo? Happy medium? Well, I thought it was funny. Was she a medium? Psychic? Whatever. Go with Patricia Arquette if you prefer. But I mean, that isn't the only offensive stuff in this issue. At one point, Googans is called a dirty Shylock, which, most people wouldn't do today. Though that may be because they don't know who Shylock is. Moving on to much less sensitive matters, I do want to point out that I am resisting the urge to make an Indiana Jones joke about Etta and the Holiday Girls hiding in a refrigerator. You're welcome. Because, I mean, it's funny, but it's kind of been done to death at this point. I kind of tried to keep it hidden in my recap, but it's pretty obvious from the artwork that the masked Mr. Doe is actually Del Slimo. Love that name. And actually, looking at him, he's basically identical to Alfonso Di Gippo from last issue. They've even got the same little mustache. So, I don't know, maybe Harry Peter just had one stock image that he used whenever the script called for evil guy with a European-sounding name who isn't German. And then here at the end, it is nice to see that Diana is getting the credit for once, although I'm not entirely sure what she did outside of the Wonder Woman costume to get that kind of credit. Maybe just because she confronted Googans and then Gloria Bullfinch, and Gloria finally changed her mind. But yeah, all in all, a solid issue, except, of course, for that one panel. So let's give it 3 stars. Okay, moving on to the post-crisis, we have Wonder Woman Volume 2, Issue 9, Blood of the Cheetah. Cover date is October 1987. Plots and layouts are from George Perez. The script is by Len Wein. Finishes were Bruce D. Patterson. Letters was Jay Costanza. Colors was T. Wood. Editor was Karen Berger. And thanks to Bob Smith. And I'm reading this from the Wonder Woman by George Perez omnibus. By the light of the full moon, Chuma is performing an ancient ritual. Barbara Minerva's heart beats to the sound of unheard drums as the old man stands over her reclined form, then slashes a dagger across her wrist. The blood drains into a waiting bowl, and Chuma bandages her wound, knowing the skin will be unblemished within hours. He takes the blood to the strange potted shrub, mixes it with a potion, and pours it onto the base of the weak plant god, nourishing it so it can in turn give his mistress life. A week later, Wonder Woman is reveling in the joy of flying over the forest north of Boston. Mindy, Julia, and Vanessa watch from the ground, with the publicist saying the letter about the second girdle of Gaia has bolstered the Amazon's spirits. Julia comments that she's looked into this Dr. Barbara Minerva, and she seems suspect, but Mindy replies that they're at least going to have a meeting, and she'll be with Diana the whole time, since Julia will be busy. We next see Diana and Mindy riding an elevator up to a penthouse apartment, discussing the importance of the meeting. Chuma opens the apartment door, and they're greeted by Barbara. She wonders if Diana brought the lasso, and the Amazon pulls it out, handing it to the doctor. Diana asks to see Minerva's artifact, and she says she'll go get it, but the lasso quickly compels the woman to proclaim that there is no documentation, no girdle, and no but then she flings it away in anguish. Angered at the betrayal, Diana ignores the fallen woman's request to talk as she storms out, taking to the sky and calling out to the gods to help her understand the treachery of this world. At the Capitella's home, Julia listens while Wonder Woman vents. She explains that she feels lost, like her time in man's world has been useless. She's no longer like her sisters on Paradise Island. Her destiny goes beyond just her original mission of stopping Ares. Julia says that she's done so much for them, and the world needs time to learn from her, something Diana says she doesn't have. That night, Chuma picks berries from the plant god, mixing them into another potion. Barbara, her body now dotted with black paint, drinks the mixture, and she writhes as she begins to transform. Her hair grows long, her spotted skin turns to fur, her strength increases, a long tail appears, and her nails extend and teeth turn sharp as she becomes the cheetah. She leaps into the city in search of her prey, and Chuma asks the treacherous plant god, the last of its kind, to protect her. Lieutenant Candy is at home, watching a news report on the mauled Tamsin McConnell, when she gets a call from Steve. He tells her his plans to return to Boston have been cancelled, as his father is dying and he needs to go home to Oklahoma. Etta offers to use her leave time to accompany him, and he accepts, saying it'll be strange to go home as he looks at a photo of himself as a boy, posed with his parents, both of which wear military uniforms. We get a quick scene of the cheetah running through the countryside, hungry and anxious for the blood feast, before returning to the Capitella's home. Vanessa is searching for Diana, but her mother says she's out in the woods, communing with nature. We see Wonder Woman slumbering propped up against a lakeside tree, a raccoon having decided to sleep on her lap for warmth. Suddenly, a noise scares the forest creature away, waking Diana just before the cheetah's tail descends from the branches and wraps around her neck. The Amazon is flung into a trunk, shattering it, then leaps as the cheetah's razor-sharp claws swing at her. They manage to draw blood, and Wonder Woman tries flying to catch her attacker. The cheetah uses her inhuman speed to knock the Amazon out of the air, and they grapple for a moment, Diana trying desperately to avoid the claws reaching for her eyes and the teeth going for her throat. She manages to punch her opponent off her, then the beast disappears into the foliage. Knowing she's being stalked, Wonder Woman listens for the creature's heartbeat, then throws her lasso, managing to capture the cat as it springs. However, the golden cord seems to have no effect, and the cheetah starts pulling Wonder Woman toward her. There's a quick tug of war, then the cat charges, smashing her opponent into another tree. Diana is trapped beneath the fallen trunk, but just as the cheetah leaps at her, Julia appears, shooting the creature with a rifle. Wounded, it dives into the lake, and Julia says she didn't have any other choice as Wonder Woman pulls on the lasso, only to find the loop empty when it breaks the surface. She dives in after her foe, but it's impossible to see in the inky, fast-moving water. A few days later, Mindy gets a call from her office, giving her a message from Julia. By the time she's reading this, Diana is heading home. At the cliffs at Martha's Vineyard, Diana prepares to return to Paradise Island. Julia and Vanessa are with her, and she tells them she regrets having to leave and considers this her second home. Vanessa asks her not to go, and she tells her little sister that she has to return to her mother, while the teen now needs to look after hers. They embrace, and Diana goes over to the waiting Julia. She tells the professor that she initially didn't understand why the gods chose Julia to be her guide, but now she realizes the wisdom and strength the woman holds. Well, that, and I'm pretty sure there's not that many people who can figure out a never-before-heard dialect of ancient Greek at the drop of a hat. Julia gives Diana a tearful hug, then hands her a duffel bag filled with newspaper clippings about Wonder Woman, as well as a photo of the Capitellases. The princess gives them an Amazonian salute, then takes off, telling them, until we meet again, before the sandals of Hermes transport her out of sight. Now, this version of the cheetah is a revamp from a classic villain from the pre-Crisis continuity. We haven't gotten to her quite yet in the 40s reviews, but she's coming up. That one was just a woman wearing a cheetah costume, kind of like something you'd get at a Halloween shop. But this is the first version where she actually transforms, kind of like a werewolf, or I guess were-cheetah, for lack of a better term. Were-cheetah? There, cheetah. There, Wonder Woman. One of my favorite lines in this issue has to be when Julia is talking to Mindy. She's like, "You'd merchandise Mother Teresa if you could manage it, wouldn't you?" I just thought that was pretty darn funny. It's such a great line, and it perfectly describes Mindy's character. The art in this issue is a bit different than the previous ones. It's almost a little, I don't know, simpler, I guess you'd say. The thanks to Bob Smith, I looked up, and he was an inker with DC in the 80s and 90s, so I'm guessing that he did a bit of the work on this issue, and so that's why it looks a little different. It's not bad, don't get me wrong. There's this great splash page of Diana soaring over the woods, and you can tell she's just having the time of her life. Something I didn't notice before, Barbara Minerva actually carries around a cane. I think the idea is that she's got a bad leg, because it mentions when she transforms into the cheetah that her leg is strong again. And honestly, the fact that she was able to hold on to the lasso as long as she did, and even get a few lies out before being overwhelmed by its power, that's pretty darn impressive. That makes me really nervous as to the power of this plant god thing that she's getting power from. One strange thing, though, is that the cheetah's tail seems to be prehensile. I mean, she literally wraps it around Diana's neck and flings her into a tree. I'll admit I'm not an expert on cheetahs, but I'm pretty sure they can't do that. To be honest, I am getting a little tired of the whole, oh, I don't understand this place, this world is so strange to me shtick that Wonder Woman is doing. I mean, I can't help but think that the 40s version didn't take quite this long to adjust. But I know we are still technically dealing with the origin, so I can at least give it a pass for now. It was brief, but I did like the little interaction between Etta and Steve. That was good to see. Wonder Woman was a bit surprised when the cheetah was able to scratch her and draw blood. And I guess you could argue that if she can block machine guns with her bracelets, she should be able to stop the cheetah's claws. But I mean, she was kind of taken unawares. And, she's not bulletproof like Superman. She does actually get hurt. When Mindy gets the call about Diana going back to Paradise Island, she appears to be at a gym. And her outfit... let's just say she wouldn't look out of place in the background of a vintage Jane Fonda workout video. The scene at the end with Diana leaving the Capitalises was really touching. I really like the way they've formed a little family, with Vanessa as a sister, and the mother-daughter relationship between Julia and Diana is just great. I mean, obviously, she has Hippolyta and all of her sisters back on Paradise Island, but it's great to see that she now has family here in Man's World. So yeah, overall, a really good issue. Let's give it 4 stars. Alright, moving on to the New 52, we have Wonder Woman Volume 4, Issue 9, The Dearly Beloved. Cover date is July 2012. Executive editor was Eddie Berganza. Cover artist was Cliff Chang. Writer was Brian Azzarello. Penciler was Tony Akins. Inker was Dan Green. Colorist was Matthew Wilson. Letterer was Jared K. Fletcher. And the editors were Matt Idelson and Chris Conroy. And I'm reading this from Wonder Woman Volume 2, Guts. War, wearing a beige suit that's spattered with blood, is sitting at an outdoor cafe in Damascus when Strife walks up. She wants him to go to Hades and Wonder Woman's wedding, but he says he only goes to a person's wedding once, so he's not going to bother witnessing the beginning of Hades' next failed marriage. As they talk, a truck drives up, and the driver hurriedly jumps out and runs away just before the vehicle explodes. The blast destroys the cafe, but barely touches the two Olympians as they have their conversation, which ends with War saying he has other things to deal with that he doesn't truly care about. At Mount Etna, Lennox is furious that Hermes abandoned Wonder Woman. Eros asks what Hephaestus was thinking giving Diana his gun, and the Smith ponders for a second before they're interrupted by Zola, demanding they figure out a way to save the Amazon. Hermes says he swore to protect the mortal woman, so they aren't going back, which Lennox refuses to accept. Eros reminds him they can't get to the underworld without the messenger, but Hephaestus says they can, since he's been invited to the wedding and can bring them as guests. He then goes off to work on a wedding present as the scene switches to Diana in the underworld preparing for the ceremony. She has a bullet hole in her chest, and her attendant shows her that her groom has reshaped the land of the dead to resemble Paradise Island. The sight brings tears to the Amazon's eyes, so the girl tells her she'll let the Lord of the Dead know that his bride doesn't want to be reminded of home. Diana notices blood dripping on the floor, which turns out to be coming from the attendant's slashed forearms. She asks who did that to her, and the girl replies that Hades wouldn't let her leave, so she did it to herself. But her escape attempt angered the god, and now he won't ever let her forget. It turns out that this girl is Persephone, former wife of Hades. Zola and Hermes are walking through the woods, with the messenger explaining that only days had passed for them between her capture and rescue. Zola comments that she's still angry they aren't on the mission to save Diana, but Hermes says that's not something she needs to worry about right now. Suddenly, there's a flash of light, and the two are joined by Aphrodite, goddess of love. Zola is stunned by her beauty, and surprised to learn that she's the wife of the trollish Hephaestus. When Aphrodite comments on her pregnancy, the mortal replies she's never felt so ugly before, but the goddess tells her she's beautiful, and to never forget it. She also says not to blame Hermes, but when Zola asks if she's going to the underworld as well, Aphrodite explains there's no room in hell for love. We next see Hades talking to someone off-panel, annoyed that so few of his family are coming to the wedding. The view zooms out to reveal he's talking to a pale, tormented man with long white hair and blue-green skin, his head and limbs held in place with chains, and being used by the Lord of the Dead as a throne. This turns out to be Cronus, the defeated father of Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus. Strife appears, greeting her uncle and excited for the wedding. She asks for a drink, and Hades indicates the wine pouring from Cronus's eyes like blood. Getting a gobletful, the goddess tells her uncle that she'd hate for him to be disappointed in love, and that she may have a way to make sure that doesn't happen again. Eros, Lennox, and Hephaestus arrive on the shore of the underworld, having been ferried across by Charon. Hephaestus, carrying a box, says the plan is to act normal until they better understand the situation. As they get closer, they see that, in absence of his family, Hades has invited every soul in the underworld, all of which are glowing a bright white as they join together to make up the walls, pillars, and even roads of the city. The finishing touches to Diana's makeup are being applied by 3 dog-looking women with writhing snakes for hair. They tell the Amazon that if she shames her husband, their father, they'll destroy her in vicious and detailed ways. Hades arrives, and the bride and groom ride 2 skinned horses down the street through the crowd of glowing souls. The god of the dead tells Diana that, to tell her the truth, he's incapable of love, though she says she doesn't believe it. He then claims that he's been told Diana may not actually be in love with him, and that this is all a scheme to keep him from getting Zola and her child. He wonders if her will truly is that strong, and she replies that she does love him. As the smirking Strife looks on, Hades asks if Diana is willing to prove it by wearing a ring before the ceremony. She says she is, and he leads her to a robed, hooded figure standing next to this ring, the lasso of truth, tied into the loop of a hangman's noose. Hades says she must put it on and profess her love for him, and the truth will either bind her to him or hang her. Okay, I know the New 52 stuff is more violent than some of the other comics, but this one just seemed to really go above and beyond. You had the car bombing, and Persephone's arms, and Cronus as a throne. It just seemed like a lot. And I'm not sure the art style helped. Akins' work is a lot more cartoony than Chang's. I know some people don't mind really violent, cartoony imagery, but personally, I'm not the world's biggest fan. In some of the panels, Zola's face is drawn in a pretty unflattering way. I mean, I get that she's pregnant and she's put on a little weight, but it's almost hard to tell it's her sometimes. Something I did notice, in the previous issue, the bullet went right through the middle of the eagle on Wonder Woman's breastplate, but in this one, the hole is actually moved to the left, a bit more over her heart. So, yeah, we definitely found out what happened to Persephone, like I was wondering last month. I guess it really is marriage till death do you part, but then she kills herself and she just ends up in the underworld, still stuck with Hades. So, yeah, that's disturbing on many levels. Like with a classical Greek statue, Aphrodite is depicted nude, although the panel layout and angles and even some of the word bubbles are framed in such a way that you don't actually see anything. And you specifically never see her face. I like how that kind of leaves it open, because, you imagining the most beautiful woman in the world is going to be a whole lot better than actually drawing it. But yeah, the way they blocked everything off kind of reminds me of that scene from the end of Austin Powers, Or like whenever you see a picture of Adam and Eve, and you're like, oh yes, Garden of Eden, land of strategically placed shrubbery. Hades using Cronus as a throne was just really, really disturbing. Like, really disturbing. What ultimately happened to Cronus depends on which myth you read. Some say that he was thrown into Tartarus with the rest of the Titans. Some say that he's chained up in the cave of the night goddess, sleeping and prophesying. Others say that Zeus made him king of Elysium, the afterlife of the heroes. And the Romans, of course, said that he eventually escaped and became king of the land that would eventually become the city of Rome. The 3 dog women who were helping Diana with her wedding dress and makeup, I wasn't quite sure who they were. At first I thought maybe they were some kind of version of the 3-headed dog Cerberus, but we already saw Cerberus. So I dug a little deeper, and turns out there's at least one myth where Hades was the father of the Furies, who were a trio of goddesses of vengeance. And usually they are depicted as old women and maybe have bat wings, but then there are some myths where they have dogs' heads and snakes for hair, just like in this issue. So yeah, learn something new every day. Wonder Woman's wedding dress is blood red. The bodice and sleeves kind of looks like a shiny latex. And there's a giant W symbol that turns into pointed shoulder pads. And then the ends of the skirt are held up with severed hands as, I think they're called skirt hitches. You know, you'd see them like with an elaborate Old West or Victorian overskirt. And then the underskirt and the cape that she's wearing is made of long lengths of chain. It definitely yells underworld chic. It's really disturbing to see the lasso of truth tied up into a noose. You know, you're perverting this thing that's supposed to be this non-lethal, peaceful weapon and turning it into this really grim, grotesque image. So I was so off-put by this issue that I kind of want to give it 1 star, but it is on purpose. I mean, we are dealing with Hades and the underworld and all the messed up stuff that goes with that, so I'm gonna bump it up to 2 stars. Okay, moving on to the TV show, we have Wonder Woman Season 1, Episode 8, Last of the $2 Bills. The air date was January 8th, 1977, starring Linda Carter and Lyle Waggoner. James Olsen played Wotan, Barbara Anderson played Maggie Robbins, and David Cryer played Hank Miller. We start out with a Nazi sub seemingly being sunk in the Chesapeake Bay by an American ship. General Blankenship then brings Steve a report saying the top Nazi agent Wotan is going to land on American soil and is headed for Washington, D.C. Diana shows the men the report on the sub, and they wonder if the two are related. Steve is skeptical that there are no survivors after sinking in such shallow water, so he and Diana go to investigate. Sure enough, it appears the Nazis faked their defeat and are coming ashore in a raft. Steve spots them through binoculars and sends Diana to report to Blankenship while he goes to confront the men. She makes the call, then spins into her costume. Steve is about to jump the masked Wotan when the Nazis' American contact shows up behind him and yells a warning to the spy. Steve wrestles with Wotan's accomplices while Wonder Woman confronts the masked man, taking note of his cold gaze through the eye holes. But just as she has him pinned, she's forced to save Steve from his opponent's bullets, allowing the spy to dump his mask and get away. A few hours later, Etta and Diana are headed to the Capitol Cafe when they're stopped by Wotan disguised with a fake beard, offering to take their photo for 50 cents. Etta orders 3 copies, and Diana notices the photographer's eyes, wondering where she's seen them before. As they enter the restaurant, the owner and her fiancé exit and are confronted by Wotan. He takes their picture despite the protestations, then continues to photograph the man as he goes back to work across the street at the Bureau of Printing and Engraving. A week later, Wotan is back at the Nazi intelligence headquarters. Looking at the photo he took of the couple, he chooses from a lineup 2 agents specially trained to infiltrate America. A doctor confirms that he will be able to alter their appearance with plastic surgery, and Wotan says that they have 2 weeks before he and the agents must be in Washington. We return to DC a few weeks later, where Etta is complaining to Diana that she never received the photos she ordered. They go to the photo lab, and Diana recognizes the man behind the counter as Wotan's contact. He says he did some work for the street photographer, but hasn't seen him in a few weeks, so Diana quickly excuses Etta and herself, then sends the woman back to the office without her. She heads into an alley, spins into her costume, and leaps through a window into the apartment over the lab. Quickly finding a hidden radio transmitter, Wonder Woman then confronts the spy, stopping his escape with her lasso. She calls Steve and Etta, and they soon arrive. The superhero tells them the man was at the beach when Wotan arrived, and shows them the transmitter, which Steve says is set to a frequency used by the Nazis. Etta explains about the photographer outside the cafe across from the Printing and Engraving Bureau, and Wonder Woman seems curious about a place that prints money. Steve says he sometimes does security checks there and offers her a tour, which Wonder Woman accepts. Back at Nazi headquarters, Wotan inspects his 2 agents, who have been surgically altered to exactly resemble Hank Miller and Maggie Robbins, the photographed couple. He explains that their mission is to steal the plates for the $2 bill from the mint and flood the market with counterfeits, ruining the economy. They go off to celebrate, Hank complaining of a toothache from a loose filling, while one of the other men in the room lags behind. He goes to a cabinet housing a secret radio transmitter, but is discovered before he can finish his message. Blankenship shows Steve what they did receive, Wotan $2 bill, and they wonder as to its meaning as we watch the 3 spies parachute into the U.S. The next morning, Diana arrives to find Steve asleep at his desk, having worked all night. He rushes off for his tour with Wonder Woman, while Diana, contemplating the $2 bill on his desk, has a revelation. At the Capitol Cafe, Wotan, again in disguise, has just been hired as the counterman, since the regular guy mysteriously vanished just this morning. Maggie, the real one, gets a call from Hank about Wonder Woman touring the printing press and excitedly goes to meet her. Hank explains the gold standard, how the paper money is valuable because it's backed up by the gold supply in Fort Knox, to his Amazon guest, and let's face it, the kids watching at home. He says no one can print their own money because he personally keeps the printing plates locked up safe. As they exit the mint, Maggie comes up and asks Wonder Woman to sign one of the cafe's menus so she can send it to her brother in the service. She and Hank leave, and Wonder Woman conveniently points out to Steve that all it would take is the plates and the right equipment to easily destroy the economy by printing millions of fake dollars. He realizes this is the meaning of the message about Wotan and rushes off, leaving Wonder Woman to smile knowingly. Headed back to the cafe, Maggie sees that the sign on the door has been flipped to closed. Annoyed, she asks Wotan why he shut down. He tells her she told him to, and the duplicates reveal themselves. Wotan then forces Maggie to call Hank, saying it's a matter of life and death. Hers. Steve, back in his office, explains his suspicions to Blankenship, and the General orders Secret Service protection for Hank. It's too late, however, as he and Maggie are locked and guarded in the cafe basement, while his duplicate, carrying the original's ID badge, is met by a Secret Service agent as he returns to the Bureau. Diana arrives at the reopened cafe to pick up lunch. She again recognizes Wotan's eyes, and realizes not all is as it seems when the menu she's given is the one she signed as Wonder Woman. She excuses herself, heads into an alley, and spins into her costume, then uses a telephone booth to call Steve. She perfectly imitates the Secret Service agent's voice, saying something is wrong and Steve needs to meet the agent at the cafe. Returning to Maggie in her costume, she mentions the autograph for Maggie's sister, tricking the imposter into revealing herself. The cafe is otherwise empty, so Wotan steps forward, telling the Amazon that he has the real Maggie and Hank imprisoned and will harm them if she doesn't take off her bracelets and come with him. They head downstairs and he locks her up with the others. They trade barbs before Wotan leaves, telling Hank the plates will soon be stolen. Steve arrives at the cafe, but the Secret Service agent is nowhere to be found. He asks Maggie to call Hank, and the disguised Nazi tells him he doesn't know where the agent, who's tied up on the floor beside him, has gone. The phony Hank, plates in hand, puts a time bomb in the vault next to the Secret Service man. Steve greets him outside the mint, saying he'll keep Hank safe until another agent arrives. The spy winces in pain from his loose filling, and Steve insists he go directly to a dentist the Major is friends with. Hank drops the plates off at the cafe first, telling Wotan what's going on. Agreeing to meet up later, Wotan shows the plates to his captives before taking off in a car. When the guard isn't looking, Wonder Woman breaks the padlock keeping their cell closed. She sees the armed man examining her bracelets and offers to show him how to put them on. For some reason, he's dumb enough to come closer, and she grabs his arm through the bars and forces him to drop his gun. The Amazon then quickly takes the man out, recovers her bracelets, and tells Hank and Maggie to go to the War Department and explain what's happened to General Blankenship. Steve is met in the waiting room by his friend the dentist. Hank's filling has been removed, and it turns out to be made of steel, which it's rumored the Nazis had to resort to due to a lack of gold and silver. Now suspicious, Steve tells the dentist not to mention this to his patient. Wonder Woman lures the fake Maggie to the basement and catches her in her lasso. The imposter tells her that Wotan is taking the plates to a rendezvous point where they'll be picked up by a submarine. The spy is locked in the cell, and Wonder Woman takes off after Wotan, as Steve and the fake Hank arrive. They learn from a patron that Maggie disappeared into the basement and go to take a look, but the Nazi knocks Steve down the steps. He frees his accomplice and locks up Steve instead, telling him the Secret Service agent is in the bureau vault with the bomb. After they leave to meet the sub, Steve is able to pick the lock and rushes to the vault. As Wonder Woman confronts the Nazis on the beach, Steve works desperately to defuse the bomb. Wotan paddles an inflatable raft as Wonder Woman takes care of the other spies, but before he can reach the waiting sub, the Amazon throws her tiara like a boomerang, puncturing the dinghy. Wotan swims to shore, defeated, and Steve manages to stop the bomb's timer with only seconds to spare. Back in his office, Steve gives Etta the case file to put into storage, along with a memento, the last $2 bill to be printed. It seems the government has decided to stop printing them in order to avoid a repeat of Wotan's plan. Etta mentions that Steve's report ignores his actions defusing the bomb and gives all the credit to Wonder Woman, which he says she deserves. Etta comments that she wishes she was like Wonder Woman, and Diana gives her friend some advice her mother used to tell her, that the most they can do is try to be the best woman they can be. To start with, the Nazi agent's codename, Wotan, that's another name for the Norse god Odin. Translating, from a different language to English, there's a bunch of different ways to pronounce the name. Odin, Woden, Wotan, Wodan. That's actually where we get the word Wednesday from. It's Woden's Day. There's a fun little subplot in this episode where Diana realizes that she doesn't know that much American slang and is trying to learn it. And then even when she's looking at this $2 bill, she doesn't recognize who Thomas Jefferson is. It's interesting to see something that they haven't mentioned really in the show before, how even though she can speak English, there's plenty of stuff that most Americans would take for granted that she just doesn't know. The restaurant owner Maggie was played by Barbara Anderson. She's most famous for the TV show Ironside, where she actually won an Emmy for her role. She was also in the $6 Million Man first TV movie pilot thing, as well as on, I think, the final season of the original Mission Impossible show. The building used for the outside of the Bureau of Printing and Engraving is actually the same building that was used for the Gotham City Police Department in the Adam West Batman show, so that was pretty fun to see. I did find it kind of ridiculous that this American spy, deep in the Nazi intelligence headquarters, keeps his radio transmitter barely hidden in, the central offices of this headquarters. Admittedly, I'm not a spy, but I'm pretty sure if he'd have kept that somewhere slightly less conspicuous, he wouldn't have been caught. We get a little bit of the 40s vibe, where Steve is, obsessed with Wonder Woman but doesn't even notice Diana. When Wonder Woman shows up for her tour of the Mint, she's got a cape and skirt added to her costume. And this is, I think, the first appearance of the cape that Linda Carter wore in the series. It's got blue and white stripes and stars, and there's at least one big red section. It's a bit over the top, in my opinion. I know when I was answering those questions for Diablo Frank's Wonder Woman 75th Anniversary show, and he asked, what do you think of Wonder Woman's cape? That's the one that came into my head first. I didn't even consider one of the more modern, dark blue kind of cloak-looking capes that she has in the more recent comics. And I know we did see a skirt way back in the pilot movie. I think like the first time you ever see her in the costume, she's got kind of a skirt on, but I think the pattern is a bit different than the one in this episode. When they're touring the Mint, they talk about the gold standard, which was kind of interesting. The US actually completely abandoned the gold standard and switched to a fiat currency 6 years before this episode aired. Something that only typography nerds like me will care about. When we get a close-up of Hank's ID badge, the font that it's typed in is actually Bank Gothic. For those who don't know, that font is actually used a lot when people want to look cutting edge and modern. If you've ever seen the show 24 or NCIS or basically any trailer for a Marvel movie, you've seen that font. So I thought it was kind of funny to see in a show made in the 70s, set in the 40s, but then I actually looked it up and it was actually created way back in the 30s, so I find it kind of funny that this font that is viewed as super cutting edge, ultra modern, is actually well over 80 years old. This is the first time we see Wonder Woman throwing her tiara like a boomerang on this show. I don't know if it's the first time she ever threw it. I've been looking and I cannot find any reference to a comic where it's the first time that she uses it as a boomerang. I gotta say, I actually know a tiny bit about how boomerang aerodynamics work, and yeah, that thing is really not designed in any way that would make it come back like that. But hey, you know, she's got magic bracelets, she's got a magic tiara. That works. At least they didn't, call it a wonderang. So the show talks about how they're stopping production of the $2 bill all the way back in 1940, was this 2? Yeah, 1942. In reality, while $2 bills were pretty rare, they were actually produced all the way until 1976. So yeah, not a bad episode. Some fun character moments. Returning to the old standby of having to, track down and defeat the evil plots of the Nazi spies. So I'm going to give this one 3 stars. Okay, last is news, and I'm going to try to get through this kind of quicker than normal because, look, it's late, and I've got family coming over for Christmas that I've got to go pick up from the airport tomorrow. And so, yeah, this may be a little more rushed, raw, and even more poorly edited than normal. Sorry. The Wonder Woman vs. Wolverine superpowered beatdown YouTube video that I talked about a few months back has finally been posted. It's really awesome. I don't want to spoil who wins. Definitely go check it out. And they then did release an alternate ending version, which is worth watching because it has a lot more scenes at the beginning with the X-Men in the mansion, and I mean, I like the X-Men. They're cool characters. It's fun to watch, people in much more accurate costumes than we're ever going to get in the movies acting these characters out. Blue Girl on Twitter tweeted a link to me and Diablo Frank, and someone who's host of a Talking Comics podcast and Legendary Runs podcast. I'll have to check those out. Anyway, it was a link to a website whose name I will not mention because, well, let's put it this way. The second word in the title is flicks, and the first word is not used in polite society outside of a kennel. Anyway, the article is very critical on Wonder Woman, especially the TV version, trying to argue that the TV show was bad for women because all the stuff behind the scenes was done by men, and the women characters who aren't Wonder Woman, this writer says, were idiots, and Wonder Woman is too perfect, no one can live up to her, and, her costume is designed to just appeal to men. Yeah, Look, Diablo Frank devoted a whole episode of his Diana Prince Wonder Woman podcast to this, where he does a really good job of going through point by point and arguing, for Wonder Woman. I don't agree with everything he says there, but definitely go check that out, because he did a really good job. The only thing I want to add to that is, okay, so let's say it's all true. So what? I mean, this show inspired a generation of women. I know there have been women, and even little girls, who will go to their last session of chemotherapy dressed as Wonder Woman. That's how inspirational she is. And I can guarantee you, unless they're comic book fans, they know most about her from the Linda Carter series. I mean, if nothing else, this TV show saved the character. I mean, at the time in the comics, she had been depowered and just completely changed. I doubt anyone today would have even heard of Wonder Woman if it weren't for the Linda Carter show. So, it wasn't perfect? Yeah, no, it wasn't. Does that really matter, though, in the grand scheme of things? It did a really great thing back in the day, and even though it doesn't fit all of our modern ideals, that's worth celebrating. The last bit of news, as you've probably heard by now, the United Nations caved to a petition wanting them to remove Wonder Woman as an honorary ambassador. Okay, I want to be respectful towards this viewpoint because they're trying to be pro-woman, but the main problem that they had was that her costume was too skimpy. I mean, really? You're gonna completely ignore the amazingly positive message of this character because of what she's wearing? To me, it feels like a can't see the forest for the trees type of thing. The only thing they know about Wonder Woman is some of the cheesecake illustrations that they've seen, and they didn't actually stop to learn anything about the character. See, this is why the movie is so important. Comics, as much as I love them, are a really, really niche market that not many people follow. Whereas a movie is going to have huge appeal and be seen by millions and millions of people. Even a mediocre movie is going to have a whole lot more influence in pop culture than a really great, amazing comic book. I mean, think about the Marvel movies. Think about Captain America. 5 years ago, before his movie came out, maybe some people had heard of him, but nobody knew anything about his character, even though he'd been around for 70 years. And then his first movie comes out, and then The Avengers comes out, and then his second movie, and the next Avengers, and his third movie, and now he's such a beloved character that it feels like practically every school child, most teenagers, and a whole lot of adults have a Captain America shield t-shirt. And then they put up a giant bronze statue of him in Brooklyn. That's what a movie can do. That's why this Wonder Woman movie is so important. If they get this movie right, and I really, really hope they get it right, we could have that level of popularity with Wonder Woman, and it would be amazing. Anyway, there are a couple petitions out there to restore Wonder Woman as an honorary ambassador. I think one of them is at about 5,000 signatures, which is a little over 10% of what the Get Rid of Wonder Woman as an Ambassador petition got. I'll be honest, I don't normally bother with online petitions, but these ones I will link to in the show notes because, it was an online petition that got her kicked out. So while I don't expect them to actually restore her to ambassadorship, it would be amazing if we could get even half as many signatures as the Remove Wonder Woman as an Honorary Ambassador petition got. It would just be amazing to see Wonder Woman fans rallying together like that. There was also a really great article in Time magazine talking about her becoming an ambassador and then getting kicked out, and the history of the character. It's definitely worth a read. And, okay, strictly speaking, this isn't news, but let's end on a positive note. I realized earlier this month that We are in fact getting 3 movies with Wonder Woman in them next year. Obviously, she's going to be in her solo movie and in the Justice League, but she's also seen in the posters and trailers for the Lego Batman movie. Will she have more than 2 lines? I don't know. I kind of doubt it, but let's put it this way. This means we're going to have 1 movie with Wonder Woman that I am really looking forward to and definitely excited to see. 1 movie that I'm very, very nervous about and really hope it does well. And 1 movie that, I'll be honest, I kind of don't care about and wouldn't bother seeing if Wonder Woman weren't in it. So, as always, I will link to all of the stuff mentioned here in the show notes. Okay, so that is it for 2016. If you have any questions, comments, complaints, concerns, conundrums, or queries, you can email me at wonderwomanwarriorforpeace@gmail.com. If you're okay with your message being read on the podcast, please let me know. The podcast homepage is wonderwomanwarriorforpeace.wordpress.com. There you can find the RSS feed, as well as the show notes and links to the iTunes and Stitcher feeds. You can look the show up on Facebook, YouTube, Tumblr, and Instagram under Wonder Woman Warrior for Peace, and on Twitter and Pinterest as Wonder Woman WFP. The intro music was Wonder Woman Theme, the Best Themysciran Symphony Dialogue Dance Mix by Taz Damien Devil. You can watch the full video on his YouTube channel. The outro music is Wonder by the Doubleclicks, and you can find them on their website at thedoubleclicks.com. Special thanks to Diablo Frank, Blue Girl on Twitter, and my coworker Denise for their help with this episode. Next episode, I will be reviewing Sensation Comics Volume 1, Issue 9, Wonder Woman Volume 2, Issue 10, Wonder Woman Volume 4, Issue 10, and Wonder Woman Season 1, Episode 9. I want to wish everybody out there a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and you will hear from me again in 2017. But until then, remember, sisters, hopes may fade, but wonders never cease.
'Cause you're not a quitter, you still believe the truth's in your lasso, your heart's on your sleeve, and when we're drowning in darkness, you'll save us all from going on.